In the theater of human existence, there exists a moment that arrives without fanfare, no dramatic orchestration, no celebratory crescendo. It manifests as a profound stillness that settles deep within your bones, resembling the relief of finally releasing a breath you never realized you'd been holding captive for decades. Within this sacred pause, something remarkable occurs. The crushing burden of external validation, that invisible weight that has shaped your every decision, begins to lose its gravitational pull. This transformation doesn't stem from developing callousness or emotional detachment. Rather, it emerges from cultivating an inner fortitude robust enough to sustain its own significance without external scaffolding. The journey to this psychological milestone rarely unfolds smoothly. It requires enduring years of being molded by societal expectations, subjected to both silent and vocal judgments, and guided by the phantom forces of approval and rejection that govern so much of human behavior. Then comes a pivotal moment. You witness someone enter a space and speak their authentic truth without the slightest tremor of uncertainty. They carry themselves with an unshakable inner certainty that seems almost mystical. You find yourself wondering, with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment, how they've achieved such apparent immunity to others' thoughts and reactions. The psychology underlying these individuals, those who navigate existence with an internal steadiness, independent of external applause, reveals profound insights about human nature and emotional freedom. The deeper you explore their mindset, the clearer it becomes that these people haven't eliminated fear entirely. Instead, they've discovered a form of liberation that most individuals never permit themselves to experience. Their story of freedom begins long before the world takes notice of their transformation. Most people exist in a state of perpetual subtle performance, not on literal stages or before cameras, but within the mundane moments of daily existence. They unconsciously modulate their voice to sound more agreeable, reshape their dreams to appear more realistic, and adjust their personality to avoid drawing excessive attention. Each individual modification appears insignificant, almost imperceptible. Yet collectively, these adjustments construct an elaborate mask. When worn consistently over extended periods, people forget they're wearing a disguise at all. The mask becomes their perceived identity, obscuring their authentic self beneath layers of social conditioning. However, another category of person exists: individuals who experience identical pressures, undergo the same conditioning, and feel the same fundamental human desire for acceptance. At some critical juncture, something within them shifts dramatically, not destructively, but in a profoundly human way that represents choosing genuine living over mere existence. This choice fundamentally alters the architecture of their self-worth. They cease delegating their confidence to external sources, reclaiming ownership of their internal validation system. Every psychological researcher confirms that human beings possess hardwired circuitry for social belonging. It's embedded within our evolutionary survival code. However, most people remain unaware of a crucial detail. The brain processes others' opinions as potential survival threats. Being judged activates stress response systems. Being rejected stimulates the same emotional pathways once reserved for physical danger. This neurological reality explains why caring about others' thoughts feels so natural, and why liberating yourself from this pattern seems nearly impossible. Those who successfully break free discover something the majority of humanity overlooks. You don't eliminate fear entirely, you develop beyond its control. Their growth story begins with embracing discomfort rather than avoiding it. The discomfort of excessive effort to please others. The discomfort of losing sleep over casual comments. The discomfort of diminishing yourself to maintain likability. Eventually, this discomfort amplifies beyond the discomfort of potential judgment, creating a psychological tipping point. There comes an ordinary day when these individuals confront their reflection and realize they've never clearly heard their genuine voice. They've become intimately familiar with the version shaped by expectations, obligations, and invisible social rules, but their authentic voice remains unknown territory. Once this realization emerges, it becomes impossible to ignore or suppress. People who transcend opinion dependency don't awaken with magical confidence or supernatural self-assurance. They awaken exhausted from being controlled by invisible critics and reviewers who exist primarily in their imagination. They choose authenticity, not because it appears glamorous or easy, but because pretending has become an unbearable burden. When they make this choice, something fundamental recalibrates within their psychological framework. The approval they once pursued desperately, no longer feels essential for emotional survival. Paradoxically, because they no longer desperately need validation, people naturally trust and respect them more. This represents one of life's most beautiful ironies. When you cease begging for validation, you become the type of person others validate organically. The world intuitively recognizes inner freedom and feels drawn to individuals who aren't shaped by fear. Another crucial component of their psychology involves accepting something most people resist with tremendous energy: embracing imperfection as an inevitable aspect of human existence. When you genuinely accept that you will occasionally misunderstand others, sometimes fail at important endeavors, occasionally disappoint people you care about, and sometimes appear foolish in public settings, your anxiety regarding others' opinions loses significant power. Most people fear judgment primarily because they fear displaying imperfection publicly. Those who achieve psychological freedom understand that imperfection isn't a character flaw, it's an integral part of being human. Once you embrace this truth, opinions lose their emotional sharpness. They aren't fragile individuals attempting to maintain flawless facades. They aren't seeking universal admiration. They're simply committed to being genuine, which requires considerably more courage than pursuing perfection. These psychologically liberated individuals recognize a fundamental truth: judgment is completely unavoidable, regardless of how carefully you live. You can be consistently kind and still be misunderstood. You can be quiet and reserved yet still face criticism. You can be generous with your time and resources while still being doubted. Once you understand that judgment is inescapable, you stop structuring your entire existence around avoiding it. This recognition brings profound freedom, understanding that no matter how thoughtfully you conduct yourself, someone will always interpret your actions through their personal lens, which has nothing to do with your actual intentions or character. People who don't care about opinions also understand that judgment reflects the judge's perspective rather than objective truth. If someone perceives confidence as arrogance, that interpretation reveals their lens. If someone views silence as weakness, that's their lens. If someone sees ambition as showing off, that's their lens. Once you comprehend that every opinion is filtered through someone's unique experiences, fears, insecurities, and worldview, you stop absorbing criticism personally. These individuals cultivate something many people never develop: a reliable internal compass. Instead of asking, "Will they approve?" they ask, "Is this aligned with who I am?" This question liberates them from endless cycles of external validation seeking. They still experience emotions, nervousness, and pressure at times. They're not superhuman. However, they maintain a fundamentally different relationship with fear. They interpret fear as informational rather than commanding. Most people feel fear and interpret it as stop, change yourself, or avoid potential judgment. People who transcend opinion dependency interpret fear differently. This feels uncomfortable, but it won't destroy me. This subtle but powerful distinction rewires their decision-making processes. They don't avoid situations simply because they might face judgment. They move through them because they trust their ability to handle discomfort. This trust develops gradually through small acts of honesty, moments when they choose their truth over approval. Each instance builds internal confidence, not loud, performative confidence, but quiet confidence that feels like calmness rather than noise. Another important psychological factor involves understanding the temporary nature of human attention and judgment. People think about you far less than your anxiety suggests. Even when someone does judge you, that judgment typically lasts only moments before their mind returns to their own concerns and preoccupations. Recognizing that human attention is fleeting proves tremendously liberating. But there's an even deeper truth beneath this understanding. People who don't care about opinions have learned to distinguish between identity and image. Image represents what the world perceives. Identity represents what you know yourself to be. When image becomes more important than identity, life becomes a performance. When identity becomes more important than image, you live from a position of authentic strength. Interestingly, the less someone cares about opinions, the more capacity they have for forming genuine relationships. They interact from a place of authenticity, rather than fear or people-pleasing, creating bonds that last longer than any performance ever could. A significant portion of this psychology stems from childhood experiences and patterns. People who grew up under constant criticism or evaluation often become hypersensitive to others' opinions. Conversely, those who are encouraged to think independently or who faced circumstances requiring them to rely on their internal compass, develop resilience to judgment. Some of the strongest individuals aren't those who received constant praise growing up, but those who learned to survive and thrive without continuous approval. This resilience carries into adulthood, manifesting as mental strength expressed through subtle behaviors, silence that isn't insecure, decisions made without explanation, boundaries set without guilt, and choices that prioritize inner peace over external acceptance. People who don't care about opinions practice something rare in human psychology: emotional neutrality. When someone compliments them, they appreciate it without clinging to it. When someone criticizes them, they evaluate it without absorbing it emotionally. Their self-worth doesn't fluctuate dramatically with external feedback. It remains steady. This steadiness doesn't stem from ego or arrogance. It emerges from clarity about who they are, what they value, and what matters in the long term. There's a particular peace in living this way. A peace that communicates, I am responsible for my actions, not for your interpretation of them. When someone lives from this place, the world perceives it not as rebellion or arrogance, but as emotional maturity. There's another layer, deeper than most people discover, that truly explains the psychology of those who live free from constant approval seeking. They discover something most people overlook. The world is far more forgiving when you're aligned with yourself. The more you hide your true nature, the more people question your authenticity. The more you reveal your genuine self, the more people relax in your presence. Authenticity possesses its own silent gravitational pull. It draws the right people closer, while naturally filtering out those who never belonged in your life anyway. This level of authenticity doesn't emerge from stubbornness or defiance. It comes from a profound internal shift, the realization that life is brief, and spending it pretending is a quiet tragedy. When you understand this truth, you begin moving differently through the world. Every choice becomes intentional. Every moment becomes an expression of truth, rather than a performance for approval. Here's something most people never acknowledge. Caring excessively about others' opinions is emotionally and mentally exhausting. It drains cognitive energy, transforming simple decisions, how to dress, what to say, which dreams to pursue, into complex calculations and negotiations. People who break free from this exhaustion discover a new kind of mental clarity. They stop searching for permission from others. They stop attempting to fit into invisible societal molds. They stop feeling responsible for maintaining appearances that aren't authentically theirs. Their minds become lighter. Their emotional worlds become calmer. They become less reactive and more reflective. When someone disagrees with them, they don't feel personally attacked. They feel curious. This curiosity enables growth rather than defensiveness. One of the greatest psychological strengths someone can develop is the ability to let things pass. Most people cling to opinions, to judgments, to misunderstandings, to perceptions of how they were viewed in various situations. People who don't care about opinions have mastered the art of emotional release. They instinctively know when something isn't theirs to carry. They recognize when someone's reaction reveals more about that person than it does about them. Because they don't cling emotionally, they don't crumble under pressure. They walk away from criticism with the same inner calmness they approach praise, not because they're indifferent, but because their identity isn't attached to either external response. People who don't care about opinions are often profoundly empathetic. Not the performative empathy that tries to please everyone, but quiet empathy that understands others' inner worlds without losing its own shape. They perceive the insecurities behind criticism. They recognize the expectations behind judgments. They see the fears behind harsh words. This awareness protects them from taking everything personally. To them, opinions are signals rather than instructions. They hear someone's perspective, interpret what it reveals about that person's worldview, and then consciously decide what to do with that information. This emotional detachment isn't coldness, it's emotional intelligence, and emotional intelligence creates profound inner freedom. They've also learned the rare skill of being misunderstood without panicking. This represents one of the highest forms of emotional maturity, because at some point every human being must confront a delicate truth. You cannot fully control how the world interprets you. The moment you accept this truth, you stop shaping your entire existence around others' interpretations. Imagine living in a way where misunderstanding doesn't uproot your self-worth, where criticism doesn't freeze your dreams, where judgment doesn't dictate your decisions. This is the psychological reality these individuals inhabit. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but consciously. People who don't care about opinions aren't rebellious for rebellion's sake. They simply protect their emotional space with clear boundaries. They don't allow guilt to dictate their choices. They don't say yes when they feel no. They don't sacrifice themselves to maintain artificial peace. Instead, they create authentic peace by honoring their boundaries. People respect those with clear boundaries far more than those who try to please everyone. Boundaries communicate self-respect, and self-respect silently teaches others how to treat you. This is why individuals who don't care about opinions often rise in life, personally, professionally, and emotionally. They make decisions based on clarity rather than fear. They pursue paths others hesitate to walk. They take calculated risks others avoid. They create value because they're not held back by the invisible cage of expectation. Perhaps the most profound aspect of this psychology is that they've learned to give themselves the approval they once sought from others. Instead of waiting for the world to recognize their worth, they recognize it themselves. As inner recognition becomes their foundation. When you don't need the world to validate your identity, you stop negotiating with your self-respect. This gives you a strength that cannot be taken away by external circumstances. People who don't care about opinions have made peace with their own contradictions. They know they're imperfect. They know they'll make mistakes. They know they'll outgrow some people and be outgrown by others. They know they'll evolve beyond old versions of themselves. Instead of hiding these truths, they embrace them. This acceptance removes the pressure to appear flawless, and without that pressure, they're free to remain curious, to learn, and to grow. Growth becomes easier when you're not afraid of how it looks to others. One of the greatest misunderstandings about people who don't care about opinions is the belief that they're disconnected from others. The truth is, they're deeply connected to purpose, meaning, self-respect, and inner values. They simply refuse to be controlled by external noise. Because of this, they develop a powerful ability. They can choose whose opinion actually matters. They don't close themselves off from feedback. They become selective. They listen to voices rooted in wisdom rather than insecurity, encouragement rather than control, guidance rather than judgment, truth rather than projection. When someone lives this way, they carry a distinctive presence, grounded, calm, and free from the need to impress. They enter spaces not to be liked, but to be real. This authenticity calms environments and makes others feel safer being themselves. People intuitively sense when they're not being evaluated. They sense when someone is speaking from the heart. They sense when someone isn't bending themselves for approval. This sensing creates trust and connection. Authenticity is contagious. When one person lives honestly, it gives others silent permission to do the same. This is why people who don't care about opinions often become natural leaders, even without intending to be. They're not followed because they demand it. They're followed because they carry an inner steadiness others wish they possessed. This steadiness doesn't come without sacrifice. To reach this psychological state, they had to release something precious, the illusion of universal approval. They had to accept that not everyone will understand them, agree with them, or support their decisions. This acceptance, difficult as it is, becomes the foundation of their freedom. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid being misunderstood. Those who don't care about opinions accept misunderstanding as part of the human condition, and this acceptance allows them to breathe easier. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of their psychology is that they remain compassionate. They don't look down on those who still care deeply about opinions. Instead, they understand that everyone is on their own journey. They know how difficult it is to break free. They remember how deeply rooted the fear of judgment can be. They understand how long it takes to hear your own voice through the noise of the world. Their compassion comes from experience, but even with this understanding, they keep moving on their own path. They don't let the world decide their destination. They don't wait for approval to take steps forward. They understand that the meaning of life isn't to be admired, but to be lived fully. The psychology of people who don't care about others' opinions isn't a story of rebellion. It's a story of liberation. It's the story of finding yourself after years of losing yourself in expectations. It's the story of choosing truth over performance, inner peace over outer applause, growth over approval. It's the story of becoming whole. When you understand this psychology deeply, something inside you shifts. You begin to realize that the freedom you admire in others has always been possible within yourself. It's not a gift given to a select few. It's a choice available to anyone willing to face their own fears and embrace their authentic self. If you're listening closely, maybe a small part of you is already stepping into that freedom. Not loudly, not publicly, just quietly. the way real change always begins. It starts as a whisper. I don't have to live for their expectations. Once that whisper appears, it begins to grow. Slowly at first, then steadily. One day you wake up with the same inner steadiness you once admired in others. Because the truth is, the psychology of people who don't care about opinions isn't really about them. It's about the version of yourself you've been afraid to meet. The version who is free, no longer performing, no longer shrinking, no longer negotiating with your identity. The version of you who simply exists, fully, honestly, unapologetically. And perhaps that version is closer than you think.